Welcome to the Wicket.
Hello and welcome to The Wicket with our first episode of 2024, looking at the world of cricket locally in the Gulf, regionally across Asia and worldwide. I'm Brian Murgatroyd, and with me as ever to pick over events across the globe are Arab News columnist Jon Pike and Arab News cricket reporter Subas Humagain. Hello gentlemen, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Brian, and to all those listening.
Happy New Year, Brian and John, and avid listeners.
Well, in this episode, we'll be talking about the Australian Women's Tour of India, the first test of the South Africa-India series, and the second match of Pakistan's Test Tour of Australia. We'll be reflecting on the chatter around the future of Test cricket in both the men's and women's games. We look back on the UAE's 2020 international series with Afghanistan. There's the opportunity to digest the Bangladesh men's white ball tour of New Zealand and what it means for the Tigers going forward. And we look ahead to Zimbabwe's men's white ball tour of Sri Lanka. So, as ever, plenty to fit into this episode, so let's get cracking. We begin with the Australian Women's Tour of India, a tour that features all three formats of the game, a test, plus one-day internationals and 2020 internationals. India won the one-off test match just before Christmas by 8 wickets to make it back-to-back test victories for Harmanpreet Kaur's side after they'd earlier dispatched England by an innings. Australia never recovered from a substandard first innings score in their test encounter, making only 219, and then they allowed India's tail to wag as the home side scored 406. And despite some fight in the second innings from Australia, India were left with just 75 to win and knocked off the runs comfortably. But Australia's taken revenge in the one-day international series, you can be sure of that. They've won that 3-0. The first match was won thanks to a commanding batting display, chasing down India's 282 for 8 with 6 wickets and more than 3 overs in hand, before they dug deep in Game 2 to defend what initially looked like a subpar 258 for 8. They won that one by 3 runs. But then in Game 3, Australia blitzed the Indians, making 338 for 7 before rolling over India for just 148 in response. Phoebe Litchfield scored 119 in that final one-day international, while captain Alyssa Healy returned to form with 82, and Litchfield was player of the series with 260 runs, 2 half-centuries and that 100. John, let's look at the test first of all. We've mentioned that Australia didn't bat well enough, but did they get their selection wrong too, I wonder? Lauren Cheadle, she played as a seam bowler but managed just 9 overs in the match. Should they have found room for another spinner, I wonder?
Rather unusually, I think they backed themselves into a corner with that selection. Cheadle's been out of internationals for 4 years following injury. She had a very successful women's big blast this year, or last year, with 19 wickets in 10 games and was very economical. She brings something different as a left armer, and she was only selected to play in the test. So it's sort of been an admission of error not to have picked her, but you really do need spin in India rather than seam bowling, as they found out to their cost.
And Subas, it seems, as we predicted on the last episode, that women's test cricket is gaining more and more fans within the administration of the game. And it certainly has the players expressing love for it as well. There's been now suggestions of multiple tests between at least the big 3 sides of India, Australia and England in the future. What are your thoughts?
Indeed, I think India's interest in the format is much needed for the growth of the game. With results coming their way and other teams keen to play against, I think this will only mean better. The WPL, once again, I think it has put women's cricketers back on the spotlight. Whatever format is, Indian fans follow the sport, and we've seen numbers expecting these one-off tests to now add up to multiple matches, and hopefully India will have test series in away tours too.
John, Australia is certainly hitting back in the one-day international series, but the biggest gulf between the teams seems to be the fielding.
Yes, it could have been so much difference in the second match had they held at least two or three of the chances that came their way. India's catching was an issue against England. Then they blamed inexperience under lights. It seems to run deeper than that. They know they have to work on it. And the old adage, catches win matches.
Absolutely, they do. Subas, Australia, despite the loss of Meg Lanning with that shock retirement last year, and Alyssa Healy's modest form with the bat prior to the final one-day international, they seem to be making a statement, don't they, ahead of next year's ICC Women's World Cup in India. Are they still the side to beat?
I think Australia have proven their supremacy once again, and with the World Cup due to be held in India, I think this clean sweep will give them a huge mental edge. And they're facing India at their turf, but I think they performed brilliantly. Batting in this condition was tougher for them, but they took the challenge well. I think in the last ODI, top order proved out right. I think they had excellent partnership at the top, and that meant the bowlers, they had their time and they backed up well to the batters as well. So I think it was a real team effort and would be a great motivation factor going ahead of the World Cup.
So still the T20I series to play there between the two sides, and we'll cover that action in our next podcast. Let's talk now about South Africa versus India, the men's tour that's taking place in the south of the African continent. As we record this podcast, the second test between the sides is getting underway in Cape Town. We'll chat about that action in our next episode. But in the meantime, let's review the Boxing Day test at Centurion. And it turned out to be a very one-sided encounter. There were hundreds for KL Rahul of India and Dean Elgar of South Africa, the latter in his final series before retiring. But India were rolled over in less than 3 days by an innings and 32 runs as the South Africa seam bowlers enjoyed themselves at a venue where history shows us it always becomes harder to bat as the match progresses. Subas, did you see India's capitulation coming?
I think yes, because South Africa has not been a happy hunting ground for India, and they don't have someone to hold the innings like Pujara, Rahane or Viari did in the past. I think they should get someone to see out the overs if the team is in trouble, and I see that problems coming in other matches too. We've seen several instances of these individuals holding the innings and opening way for someone like Virat or Rishabh to accelerate the innings in the latter end. And once these players are not there, I think the pressure of wickets falling have suffered India a lot. In bowling wise also, I think South Africa's reserve pacers would get into India's 11 easily. I think the bowlers have not been up to the mark. The quality of bowlers, the difference we see in two sides. And to add up, I think Marco Jansen has been a real revelation for South Africa. It's like playing with 12 players with bat and ball. He's been exceptional, and South Africa, I think they had it will be easier for them to go 2-0 up if India doesn't change their squad.
John, a word on Dean Elgar. We mentioned he got 100 in that test match. It's his last series before retiring. I've heard it said that the best way to go out is by leaving the crowd wanting more rather than overstaying your welcome. But it really does seem a shame, doesn't it, to see his retirement, given he's obviously got the ability to continue to produce at the highest level.
It is a great shame. I think he's 36 now. The coach, South Africa, I think, is looking to bring on younger talent. He's been a gutsy opener, although I think in the first test match he unveiled some cover drives that he'd been keeping quiet for a few years. He said one reason for his retirement is that there's not enough test cricket coming up for South Africa. Why not go to New Zealand then when experience is needed, going with a very depleted side? Something doesn't seem quite right. He's captaining the second test, which, as you mentioned, started. So maybe his last innings, the first test match of 185, won't be the one that is going to be remembered for.
Well, the lead-up to that second test has featured comment about the South Africa squad to go to New Zealand. West Indies have chosen 7 uncapped players for their upcoming tour of Australia, and that followed the South Africa selection with a host of uncapped players named, including an uncapped captain, Neil Brand. South Africa seem to have put all their eggs in the basket of the SA20, wanting their best players around for that domestic tournament. But John, this surely does untold damage to the credibility of the test format, doesn't it?
Well, it's proving controversial. Steve Waugh's already come out accusing cricket's administrators of hastening the death knell for Test cricket. He's suggesting that maybe it's going to result in only 4 or 5 countries actually competing in test matches in the future. When a big name like War comes out, then you really do sense that there's something moving behind the scenes. Dean Elgar was quite interesting when he said that the players want to play Test cricket, but we don't have any say what goes on behind the scenes. We just play where we're told. And I think there is a big danger that those running the game are seeing only dollars in front of their eyes and seem to be not taking a longer term view and getting a balance between the various formats to suit the players, spectators, as well as the sponsors.
Subas, we mentioned that West Indies selection. West Indies players like Jason Holder and Kyle Mayers, they've opted out of the Australia tour to play franchise cricket. Do you have sympathy for them, given they simply don't get paid the same amount for their international duty as, say, an England or an Australia cricketer?
Well, they are professional cricketers, Brian, and I think we're slowly getting into that phase that we feared about now. Players frequently choosing franchise cricket to national duties, and it's not just big tournaments like IPL, BBL, or PSL now. Other up-and-coming franchise leagues, they have started to target big stars and offer them big money, something the players look forward to as professional cricketers. I think the ball is on the court of the respective boards now to bring something to balance out things, managing calendars. Maybe NOCs on per player per tournament basis would be an ideal thing. If not, I think we may see big players only featuring in ICC tournaments and the bilateral series slowly losing their charm.
John, you've mentioned Steve Waugh already, calling the current selections a defining moment for the future of Test cricket. Pat Cummins, he's talked about a silver bullet to help cure the fact that Test cricket seems to be an unloved format in the hands of administrators. But I have to say, it seems to be a case of all talk and no action at the moment. Do you think administrators are happy or at least content to see Test cricket wither on the vine? And what needs to be done to ensure its longevity? I saw Steve Waugh's comments about maybe having a fund from the ICC that ensures that match payments for Test match cricket are more equal across the board. Is that a start?
Possibly. Pat Cummins mentioned a silver bullet without actually saying what it might be. He said he hoped that there would be one that could be found. It's a battle between money and cricket's heritage, and I think it is a lot of talk at the moment. We'd like to see, I think a lot of us would like to see much more action. And maybe this is the catalyst that's going to open up a discussion to try and ensure that Test cricket can be maintained. Maybe a little bit reduced, certainly maintained as part of cricket's heritage, as Waugh said. How dare people seem content to let something wither on the vine that's been the birthplace of Bradman and Grace and Sobers and the likes?
Yes, it's a fascinating situation. And of course, we'll keep across it here at the Wicket. Let's move on now to Australia versus Pakistan. As we record this episode of the podcast, the two sides are starting the third and final test of their series in Sydney. David Warner's test swan song before he heads to the UAE to play for the Dubai Capitals in the upcoming DP World ILT20. We'll chat about that Sydney test next time. But in the meantime, let's look back on the Boxing Day test, which was a cracking encounter. It was won by Australia by 79 runs to take an unassailable 2-0 lead in the series. And it was the Wicket's man of 2023, Australia captain Pat Cummins, who led the way. He produced a superb performance, 10 wickets in the match, and he passed 250 test wickets during the course of that effort. John, I know you're a big fan of Pat Cummins, but even you must be running out of superlatives for him now.
Not yet. A fabulous end to an incredible year for him. And I think the most impressive feature of that test match was that he brought himself back into the attack at critical moments to make crucial breakthroughs. That really is a sign of great leadership. And he also made light of complaints about the technology and about the umpires. So not yet out of superlatives.
Subas, it was in the end a match of fine margins, and Pakistan will look back, I'm sure, and think, what if? They dropped catches, most notably Mitchell Marsh in the second innings when Abdullah Shafiq, had he caught him, it would have made Australia 46 for 5. and the target for Pakistan may have remained very much within their compass. It's all very well to blame other things, but you've got to look after your own business, and Pakistan simply didn't catch their catches, did they?
Indeed, Brian. I think Pakistan had outside chance when they pinned Australia to 16 for 4 in the second innings. That drop of marks was the turning point. Even while chasing in the fourth innings, despite the target, I think Pakistan could have dragged the game a bit further. But Cummins' spell with Rizwan's wicket ended the game. I think the game was done within 5 overs of Rizwan's departure, similar to what we saw in the first test. I think Pakistan have not been able to carry on momentum they have for a longer period. I think the batters have not been backed up well. They have stitched up partnerships, but the bigger partnerships, the match-winning partnership, are still lacking. And if they don't show great until the end in coming matches, I think the whitewash is evident.
And Subas, I'll just pick up on something that John mentioned there about Mohammed Hafiz railing at inconsistent umpiring and technology after that Melbourne test. Did he have a point, do you think?
I would like to differ, Brian, because we are using technology and there will be debates on its efficiency. But I think Hafiz's statement came after that all-important wicket of Rizwan, which proved to be a game changer as well. But I don't think there were any big blunders that you start doubting the use of technology overall. We've seen the debates in the past without the use of technology. So we've used this on our own. So I think it's only good to give umpires the benefit of doubt and get it double check with the use of technology. I think it's need of time now. We can work on how to make it better, but I think doubting the technology overall, I think it's not a ask of time at the moment.
And John, what's happened to Babar Azam? They really needed him to stand up and score, but his scores in this series, actually, in the first two tests have been very modest: 21, 14, 1 and 41. They're not the returns you'd expect from a player of his ability. Is it a World Cup hangover? Perhaps, I don't know, a hangover after losing the captaincy or resigning the captaincy, whatever you want to call it. What's the reason, do you think, for his struggles?
Well, it certainly seems to go deeper than just a World Cup hangover. His captaincy did seem troubled, and he was confrontational. I think he may have upset some people along the way. His game suffered during that time, and looks like his mental approach to it has suffered. We can't know the full story, but it is a big disappointment from such a talented player. And I would imagine he's going to be upset, not only about captaincy, but also about his own loss of form. And one hopes that he comes through it fairly quickly.
So that's a look back at that second test in Melbourne, and we'll look back at the third test in Sydney in our next episode. Let's chat now about one of the leading associate teams, that's the UAE. They've hosted Afghanistan in a 3-match 2020 international series in Sharjah, and it's produced some compelling cricket. In match 1, Ramanullah Gurbas, the Afghanistan opening bat, once again he underlined his credentials as one of the leading short-form opening batters about, with a brilliant 100 from 52 balls that meant that the visitors scored 203, which was far too many for the UAE. But in game 2, the hosts hit back with an 11-run win. There were half-centuries for captain Mohammad Wasim and Aryan Lakra, and 4 wickets apiece for Ali Nazir, the young all-rounder, and Mohammad Jawadullah, the left-armer. It set up the series decider, and Afghanistan actually won that quite comfortably, restricting the UAE to 126 for 9 before chasing that down with 4 wickets and 9 balls in hand. Subas, this series, the result follows on from the UAE only narrowly losing a 3-match series against New Zealand last August. Is it evidence of real progress for the UAE, I wonder, especially their young players like Ali Nazir and Aryan Lakra, as well as Victor Aravind, who made an unbeaten 70 in match 1?
I think UAE has been playing splendid cricket over the years. I think their domestic structure, especially the ILT20, it has been a real pivotal to give the platform for youngsters like Ali Nasir, Victor Aravind himself, Aryan Lakra. We've seen under 19 players getting big deals, getting to play with old class players, and that has helped them to set up against these big teams like New Zealand and Afghanistan. I think they don't have that fear factor to play against. But one disadvantage I would say is they're missing the World Cup. I think that would be a real monument for the UAE cricket overall. But They faced against Nepal. They were group winners, but one bad game and they missed out on the World Cup. But I think there's so much to offer within that young squad. I think they're playing the Asia Cup T20 qualifiers sooner now. So the UAE cricket, I think it's only getting better from here. They have gone through the transition period. They've got good talents coming up. They have started performing as well. So if you are a UAE cricket fan, I think you'd be excited to see these youngsters play.
Yes, John, Subas mentioned there the fact that the UAE have missed out on this year's T20 World Cup in the Caribbean and the USA. It's a crying shame, isn't it? It really is.
It's very sad. They don't quite seem to be getting the return that their investment and their strategies deserve, nor that their abilities deserve. But what is reassuring is that the policy of focusing on the development of young players is showing dividends, and I'm sure that they will get stronger and stronger and more successful.
Yes, all credit there to Mudassir Nazar, the former Pakistan all-rounder, who's been very much at the forefront of that development of the younger players in the UAE. And from that perspective, at least, they continue to go from strength to strength. But Subas, what do you read into Afghanistan's performances? There's obviously been a bit going on off the field. I think that's fair to say. The no objection certificates of 3 players, Mujibur Rahman, Naveen ul Haq and Fazl Haq Faruqi, they were withdrawn by the Afghanistan Cricket Board after all 3 wanted to play franchise cricket instead of for their country. Naveen and Faisal are now back in the fold. Naveen actually took 4 wickets in that third and final T20 international, but he has been banned from playing in the DP World ILT20 in the UAE for refusing to play for the Sharjah Warriors without an improved contract, which is what he wanted. And Mujib, well, he's been pulled out of the ongoing Big Bash League in Australia, where he's been playing for the Melbourne Renegades. It's there's a fair bit going on there, isn't there?
The situation, I think it's not good for board as well as the professional cricketers. So once Afghanistan has been playing well, I think the demand for the players in franchise cricket has been increasing day by day. I think it started with Rashid Khan and Mohammad Nabi. Now you can see in the IPL itself, Rahmanullah Gurbaz being retained. I think Omar Zai has gotten a good deal, even though he got less money. I think he can prove himself over the years. But Afghanistan Cricket Board, I think there should be a sensible ending to this controversy. I think the players, they will be in demand. I think one of the reasons Afghanistan cricket has strived forward is these players playing in different conditions and they being able to perform against these big teams because they have been playing in franchise cricket. I think you can't just denounce franchise cricket overall and just ask them to focus on international cricket, financial side or skill set side. I think it will hamper the players and the board both. So I think all these players and board should come together and look for a better solution.
Jonathan Trott, he's signed on as Afghanistan coach for another year. Looking at what happened in the ICC Cricket World Cup, where they were a Glenn Maxwell innings away from a shot at the semi-finals, he seems to have had a pretty good effect on them.
Yes, it's good to see. He was not an obvious candidate for such a role, but given the issues that he had at the end of his career, he's probably got empathy levels which fit well with the situation for the Afghans. Not an easy job.
Yes, remember, he only got the job on the basis of Graham Thorpe having to pull out due to a medical emergency. So he certainly made the most of that opportunity. Afghanistan, they're now heading to India for 3 2020 internationals, starting on Thursday, January the 11th, all part of both sides' preparations for the T20 World Cup in the USA and the Caribbean. Bangladesh's white ball tour of New Zealand is over, and it turned out to be a very competitive encounter between the two sides. New Zealand won the one-day international series 2-1, with Bangladesh rolling over New Zealand for just 98 in the final match in Napier, and that was Bangladesh's first win in New Zealand in a one-day international. They romped home by 9 wickets with just 15 overs gone. In the 2020 international series, that was shared 1-1 with match 2 washed out. Subas, it was fascinating to hear Chandika Hathirasinghe's comments afterwards, the Bangladesh coach. He called it a successful tour, which, given Bangladesh's history of travelling poorly, is probably fair enough, isn't it?
Indeed, a fair one. I think Bangladesh, we've seen them struggle away from home. They've got results to show for at home conditions, but when they go away, I think it's tough to expect results from them. But lately they've got the performance that has helped them get the results. And after Singh, I think he is right to make that comment, because we saw some real team performance in this tour as well. There was no any individual brilliance. Young players coming up, they've got replacement ready for senior players. I think since the World Cup, I think Tamim Iqbal's place had been a real controversy. The board was under pressure, but the young players have stepped in, and getting these results will make it easier for board. I think they have to be some a bit defensive towards these new generation players, but it's a fair comment to say that New Zealand tour have been a successful one for them.
John Hathras Singh's comments were also interesting for the way he praised Najmul Hussain Shanto and said under him and without some senior players on the trip, the atmosphere in the dressing room was, in his words, much better. If you were Shakib Al Hassan, the captain who was absent from this trip, how would you read that?
Hassan, of course, is no stranger to controversy. We saw that with Angelo Matthews, of course, in the World Cup. I read that he's got ambitions, aspirations to be a politician. If I was him and looking from the outside with a fairly volatile nature, I think I'd take it pretty personally. I'd maybe feel that maybe I was trying to be sidelined. So given Hassan's standing in cricket in his country, I would imagine there may be some interesting discussions about to take place, and I wouldn't bet on Hassan coming out on top.
Yes, he's very good at coming out on top and has done over many, many years. So we'll watch this space. No question about that. But Subas, the T20 World Cup is just 6 months away. Should New Zealand be concerned by these white ball performances, or do you expect them to step up in the Caribbean and the USA?
Well, I think the story has been same for past few years with New Zealand. I think they've not got the results they wanted in bilateral series, but when it comes to the major events, I think they get the team sorted, they get the results. Towards the end point, I think they falter away. But I think for World Cups, I think New Zealand are always a better side. They well equipped with their strengths. We saw this time as well. I think they were on paper, if you see, they were not the best side, but once the game started, they had individuals performing. Their team unit came strong, and I think that's what we're going to see in the Caribbean with T20 specialists all over. I think New Zealand will be a team to beat.
Let's look ahead now to the Sri Lanka against Zimbabwe white ball series. And after a 2023 to forget, when they failed to qualify for both the 50-over Cricket World Cup and this year's T20 World Cup, Zimbabwe are back on the horse with a tour consisting of 3 one-day internationals and 3 2020 internationals, which starts on Saturday, the 6th of January. Craig Irvine is back after injury and captains the one-day international side, while Sikandar Raza remains as T20I captain. Sean Williams, though, is absent with a side injury, and he's a massive loss, given his ability to bowl spin and play spin. But there are also a host of inexperienced and uncapped players in the squad, and the team is coached by Walter Chawagutta, someone who's been around the national setup for many years and has stepped in an interim capacity as coach after Dave Houghton's time came to an end following the dual failures in the Cricket World Cup and the T20 World Cup qualifiers. Subas, it's asking a lot of this group, isn't it, to go to Sri Lanka? Never an easy place to tour and be competitive, isn't it?
I think after what happened against Ireland at home turf, there's nothing more worse than this. Whatever is the result, I think Sri Lanka, they'll want to look at the positives with some new players going in, new coaching staff. I think they will want to have a fresh start. It has been a year to forget for them. And only fresh start would mean something. I think individuals like Sikandar Raza have a big pressure to get things back on track. And Sri Lanka, if they can get anything out of Sri Lanka, I think that would be a huge boost to get a fresh start for this year.
John, it certainly is root and branch stuff, isn't it? It looks like Zimbabwe really grasping the nettle to rebuild ahead of a tilt at reaching the 2027 Cricket World Cup.
Yes, it's going to be a long haul, though, given those recent failures.
Yes, it certainly is. There's no question about that. And, well, we'll keep an eye on what's going on in that Sri Lanka-Zimbabwe series. And we'll update you here in the next episode of The Wicket. Finally, as we always do, gentlemen, what are your plans for this week, cricket-wise? And what are you looking forward to? Subhash, first of all?
I think it is going to be a week full of Test cricket. We start the morning with India, Pakistan versus Australia. Then, as soon as it ends, we're going to have India, South Africa. I hope both the tests go 5 days, which has been hard to find by with our side struggling. But I think Pakistan and India will put up some fight in both the games.
And John, what about you? I presume as well as those test matches, you'll probably be tuned into the India-Australia T20 International for the women, because of course that's a key thing, really, a key series ahead of the 2020 World Cup that those women are going to be playing in Bangladesh later on this year.
Yes, I agreed with that. I agree with looking forward to test matches, which have started, see how they unfold. As Subhash said, I think India certainly will be looking to strike back. Whether Pakistan have got the strength to do so, I think we'll see. But for the women's T20, yes, we may get some clues as to how they're going to fare when the Women's World Cup comes around.
Well, that's all for the future, but hopefully you've enjoyed our little chat about what's been going on in the world of the Gulf region, Asia and worldwide here at the Wicket. And we'll be back soon with more cricket chat. Don't worry about that. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment on what you've heard wherever you get your podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback and let us know if there's anything you'd like us to feature in future episodes. For now, though, this is Brian Murgatroyd along with Jon Pike and Subas Humagain saying thanks for listening, and we look forward to your company next time.